Hello and welcome to our morning edition of Arirang News. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. Amid continued pressure from the United States on South Korea to raise tariffs, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent warned that there will be no trade deal with Seoul until the National Assembly formally ratifies the trade agreement made in October last year. The U.S. Federal Reserve has decided to hold its key interest rate steady, despite increased pressure from President Donald Trump to cut borrowing costs. The Fed Chair Jerome Powell defended the importance of central bank independence, saying policy decisions will not be guided by political demands. Samsung Electronics posted a record annual operating profit in 2025, worth approximately $30 billion, an increase of 33% from the year before, amid the global artificial intelligence boom. We begin this morning with South Korea facing renewed trade pressure from the United States, as U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent links progress on a trade deal to parliamentary approval in Seoul. Our Buniran starts us off.
U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has made clear that there will be no trade deal with South Korea until the National Assembly formally ratifies it, reinforcing pressure from the Trump administration over stalled legislative approval in Seoul. In an interview with CNBC on Wednesday, Bessent said the South Korean parliament has not passed the trade deal, so there is no trade deal until they ratify it, adding that it would be helpful if things moved along. His remarks refer to South Korea's pending special law on U.S.-bound investment, which Washington sees as a key condition for finalizing the agreement. The comments follow President Donald Trump's warning that tariffs on South Korean goods could rise from 15% to 25%, citing the National Assembly's failure to legislate what he called a great deal. Trump later signaled some flexibility, saying the two sides would work something out, raising the possibility that the tariff hike could be delayed or suspended. The Blue House says Washington's frustration is focused squarely on legislative delays, not on Seoul's willingness to honor its commitments. Policy Chief Kim Yong-bum told reporters the U.S. understands that investment projects cannot begin until the special law is passed, but believes the process has moved more slowly than expected. Kim said the government will press lawmakers to accelerate the bill in February, while also explaining to Washington that Seoul is taking steps to prevent further delays. He added that officials are exploring ways to conduct preliminary reviews of investment projects, so implementation can begin immediately once the law is approved. Diplomatic channels are also intensifying, with Industry Minister Kim Jong-hwan traveling to Washington to meet U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick and other senior officials to clarify South Korea's position. For now, both sides appear to be keeping negotiations open. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, the U.S. Federal Reserve held interest rates steady this morning, resisting renewed pressure from President Donald Trump to cut borrowing costs. Fed Chair Jerome Powell said inflation remains elevated and policy decisions will continue to be guided by economic data, not political demands. Our Lee Seung-jae has more.
The U.S. Federal Reserve has kept its benchmark interest rate unchanged, pushing back against continued pressure from President Donald Trump to cut borrowing costs and underscoring the central bank's independence. At the conclusion of its two-day Federal Open Market Committee meeting on Wednesday, the Fed voted to maintain its policy rate in the 3.5 to 3.75% range. The decision follows 3 consecutive rate cuts since September. The rate freeze means the interest rate gap between South Korea and the higher end of the U.S. rates is 1.25 percentage points. 10 of the Fed's 12 voting members, including Chairman Jerome Powell, supported the decision to pause the cuts. 2 officials, Stephen Moran and Christopher Waller, dissented, calling instead for a quarter percentage point rate cut. Speaking at a press conference, Powell said the current policy stance remains appropriate.
In support of our goals, today the Federal Open Market Committee decided to leave our policy rate unchanged. Having lowered our policy rate by 75 basis points over the course of our previous 3 meetings, we see the current stance of monetary policy as appropriate to promote progress toward both our maximum employment and 2% inflation goals.
The decision comes amid heightened political pressure on the central bank. Powell recently disclosed that he is under investigation related to his congressional testimony last year and the Fed's building renovation project. He has suggested the scrutiny reflects tensions stemming from the Fed's refusal to set interest rates based on political preferences. While declining to address politically charged questions directly, Powell stressed the importance of central bank independence, reaffirming that monetary policy decisions are driven by economic data and long-term stability rather than external pressure. 이승재, Arirang News.
So the U.S. Federal Reserve has decided to keep its key interest rates steady despite intense pressure from President Donald Trump to cut rates. For more on this, we're joined today by Professor Shin Myung-gyu, Associate Professor of Economics at Yonsei University. Professor Sim, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
So the Fed announced this morning that it will hold its interest rate steady, saying the economic activity in the United States has been expanding at a solid pace. What's your take on this?
Yeah, as was expected before the meeting, the Fed kept its target interest rate at the current level, as you just mentioned. Most importantly, there still is a pressure on the U.S. inflation rate, and it was 2.7% in December, which is lower than expected, but it is still above 2%, which is the target of the Fed on the long-run inflation rate. One might argue that it is not that high compared to what we observed in 2022 or 23, but the importing firms' capability to keep the price level not too high seems to be at the limit. In the recent interview, the CEO of Amazon argued that many firms cannot sustain such a strategy so that high tariff will be passed through to the consumer prices very soon. Because the price stability is the most important objective of the Fed, it was somewhat expected decision. And also, given the threat of the US government on the Fed's independence, I guess lowering the interest rate, which is consistently required by the US president, was not an option in the current meeting.
Right, and Trump wants to lower rates, but analysts say Fed rate cut could be months away. And some expect that the bank is likely to lower rates only once or twice in 2026, even under Trump's next pick for Fed chair amid improved economy and labor market expectations. What are your thoughts on the Fed's direction for the rest of the year?
Yeah, I also agree with the usual analysis, and that's based on my comment that I made before. The most important task of the central bank is that it should keep the low inflation rate. While economic growth is also important for the Fed, it is not of the first importance to the central bank. Given that there are so many potential factors, including the pass-through of tariff on consumer prices and the seemingly never-ending tariff war that can push up the price level of the US, I believe the Fed will not be able to lower its target rate very soon or very easily. Also, there is a midterm election in November, and keeping low inflation rate seems to be also important for the current US government to win the election. Lastly, as is well known in economics, there is a lagged effect of the interest rate policy on the inflation rate, and so the Fed will not be able to lower the key rate while there are pressures on the price level. I expect the Fed will take a wait and see strategy, which means that it waits until it can obtain more clear signals about the U.S. economy to make a further move.
I see. And turning to U.S. impact on the Korean economy, the Trump administration warned this week that it will raise auto and reciprocal tariffs from 15 to 25%. How might this affect Korean businesses, especially car makers?
Let me first point out that nobody is sure whether such a threat will be really materialized or not. If 20% tariff rate would be really imposed, it will definitely hurt the Korean car makers because that makes the Korean car makers lose their price competitiveness in the US. According to Kia, its operating profit declined by about 30% from a year ago in 2025 because of the tariff. If the tariff rate remains high, it will clearly hurt the Korean car makers, even they try their best to improve the quality of their cars because it takes time to improve the profitability from more R&D. But the US president again changed his stance just one day after his announcement on the tariff on cars from South Korea. And it makes us believe that 10% point increase in the tariff rate might not really materialize. Also, the Supreme Court of the US might ban the US government to use the tariff rate as a policy tool. So there is still a lot of uncertainty about the tariff and also the trade. So it might be too premature to conclude that the recent news on the tariff on cars would be a real harm to Korean business or not.
Right, and with those uncertainties and amid doubts about Trump's policy making, the US dollar sank to a 4-year low this week. Can we expect the Korean won to strengthen as a result?
Yes, that is kind of the good news that the value of Korean won was a little bit restored for the last several days. However, it seems to be a little bit premature to conclude that the Korean won really becomes strong again or not. About a month ago, we had a similar experience that the value of Korean won suddenly increased, but it did not last that long. So we need to wait more to see if the changes in the trend of the exchange rate is really prolonged or not, so that it reflects the fundamental of the Korean economy, or it is just a random shock that makes people to say that Korean won is really now okay. My expectation is that the trend of low value to Korean won would be somewhat continued over time unless there is a fundamental change in the exchange market. Most importantly, uncertainty about the trade policy, as we just discussed before, does not seem to be fully resolved as we experience this week. I, together with my colleague, showed in our research that regardless of the uncertainty surrounding the Korean economy, Korean won loses its value when the uncertainty level increases. And given that we see a lot of uncertainties surrounding the Korean economy, I'm not so sure if the Korean won really restores its value very soon or not.
I see. I guess we'll have to see how that goes. All right, Professor Shim, thank you so much for insight this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Samsung Electronics has announced record results for 2025, with its semiconductor business driving the company to its highest ever annual revenue. On Thursday, the company reported an annual revenue of 333.6 trillion Korean won, around $233.7 billion, and an increase in operating profit of more than 33% from the year before, worth approximately $30.5 billion. Strong demand for high-bandwidth memory and a sharp rise in memory prices lifted both quarterly sales and operating profit to all-time highs. Samsung expects the growth momentum to continue in the first quarter this year, led by sustained AI and server-driven memory demand. The South Korean Air Force's Black Eagles aerobatic team refueled at Japan's Naha Air Base in Okinawa on Wednesday, marking the first time Japan has provided refueling support to a Korean military aircraft. Japanese media reported the team departed Wonju Air Base and landed in Naha at around 10 a.m. Japan's State Minister of Defense, Masahisa Miyazaki, said the stopover was symbolically significant and highlighted the importance of defense cooperation amid growing regional security concerns. The refueling followed a phone call between the two countries' defense ministers on December 26th and a formal request for airspace access and support sent on January 5th. Former First Lady Kim Keon Hee has been sentenced to 20 months in prison in the first trial after a court found her guilty of accepting bribes from the Unification Church. Our Cha Yun-kyung reports.
The Seoul Central District Court sentenced former First Lady Kim Keon Hee to 1 year and 8 months in prison on Wednesday after finding her guilty of receiving bribes from the Unification Church in exchange for business and political favors. The court also ordered Kim to forfeit around 12.8 million won, worth around $9,000, and will also confiscate a diamond necklace that was at the center of the bribery charges.
The defendant is sentenced to 1 year and 8 months in prison. The graph necklace is to be confiscated. A total of 12,815,000 won shall be collected from the defendant.
Presiding Judge Woo In-sung said the defendant misused her position as a means to seek profit and failed to reject high-end luxury goods shared in connection with the Unification Church's requests and focus on her own adornment. Kim was also indicted for violating the Political Funds Act for receiving free opinion polls worth $187,000 from a self-proclaimed power broker ahead of the 2022 presidential election. Additionally, Kim had been charged with engaging in stock manipulation at BMW dealership Deutsche Motors. With regard to these two allegations, however, the court found her not guilty. For Kim's alleged participation in the stock price manipulation scheme, the court recognized that Kim may have been aware of the scheme but could not determine that Kim took part in it as an accomplice. The court also found that Kim and her husband, former President Yoon Suk-yeol, had received free opinion polls from the power broker, but ruled that they did not constitute an economic benefit, as they were not provided exclusively to the couple. The ruling on Wednesday made Kim and her husband the nation's first former presidential couple to face imprisonment after criminal convictions. Cha Yoon-kyung, Arirang News.
In a world of fast, modernized food, Korean temple cuisine takes a slower path. And Buddhist monk Venerable Sunjae of Netflix Culinary Class Wars shares a philosophy where food becomes medicine. Our culture correspondent Park Geon-woo met her to learn more.
Venerable Sunjae, a Buddhist monk and contestant on the global Netflix hit Culinary Class Wars, says temple food healed the liver disease that had pushed her to the brink of death.
Temple food traditionally excludes ingredients like garlic and focuses on balance to promote long and healthy lives. This wisdom resonates with people overseas, making it appealing to global tastes.
When preparing side dishes, homegrown ingredients that have endured harsh weather and intentionally limited watering are chosen, believing they hold richer nutrients. From fresh fruit to Napa cabbage, zucchini and winter spinach, every ingredient is treated with gratitude and nothing is wasted.
You shouldn't throw away even a single leaf. Someone who doesn't understand the value of agriculture cannot truly be a practitioner.
As much as possible is kept, and even the water to blanch vegetables is reused, believing every part carries life.
People who cook are doctors, and that's why cooking is difficult. They must save not only the human body, but the life of nature as well, because we live only when nature lives.
Scooping out zucchinis with a spoon, a method she says helps braise them more evenly, was another small but meaningful lesson. What's served up are stir-fried walnuts glazed with traditional Korean syrup, tofu braised in soy sauce aged for over 6 decades, white kimchi made from homegrown cabbage, and many more. Now it's time to eat, but with rituals. Beginning with the sound of Sunjae's traditional Korean Buddhist wooden clapper, bowls are cleansed with water, and only as much food as can be eaten should be taken, as leaving leftovers is strictly avoided. The meal can take over an hour as you keep praying to appreciate the food served on the table.
I offer a prayer of gratitude to my ancestors, to everyone whose efforts brought this food to me, and to the lives of nature. A cabbage does not grow on its own. It holds the soil, water, wind, and sunlight within it. Through that gratitude, I reflect inward on all the connections that made my life possible.
말씀하신 것처럼 여러 가지 한식의 어떤 지혜 같은 게 많이 담겨져 있고 그 세계로 뻗어나가는 데 있어서 그럼 스님의 역할은 앞으로 어떤 게 있다고 보십니까?
Though our ancestors didn't use scientific or medical terms and spoke in symbolic ways, that doesn't mean their wisdom should be ignored. Korean food has long been made with the mindset of medicine. I hope this wisdom is preserved, understood, and shared without losing its roots.
and through food, a universal language. Venerable Sunjae emphasizes the importance of living in peace, not only with one another, but with all forms of life, including the earth, water, wind, and sunlight. 박건우, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Chu Ji-hyun, and this is The World Now. U.S. President Donald Trump on Wednesday warned Iran to accept a nuclear deal or face a far more devastating U.S. attack as American warships moved closer to the country. Trump said a U.S. naval force led by the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln is approaching Iran, calling it an armada, and said that time is running out for Tehran to negotiate a deal that would prevent it from developing nuclear weapons. Trump said his previous warning to Iran was followed by military strikes last June and warned that the next attack would be, quote, far worse. Iran responded by saying any U.S. military action would trigger Iranian strikes against the United States, Israel, and their supporters. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said Iran's armed forces are ready to immediately respond to any aggression, while adding Tehran remains open to a fair nuclear deal that guarantees no nuclear weapons. In India, a charter plane crash on Wednesday killed Ajit Pawar, the Deputy Chief Minister of India's Maharashtra state. The Learjet 45 went down in an open field near the city of Baramati while attempting an emergency landing. It burst into flames, killing Pawar, 2 staff members, and 2 crew. Witnesses at the scene reported a series of explosions that prevented rescuers from approaching the burning wreckage. Pawar was traveling from Mumbai to campaign for local elections when the disaster occurred. U.S. multinational tech firm Amazon announced job cuts on Wednesday affecting 16,000 corporate employees in a massive restructuring move to replace human workers with generative artificial intelligence. The second round of layoffs in just 3 months brings the total number of corporate job cuts to 30,000. Senior Vice President Beth Galletti said Amazon is reducing management layers, increasing ownership, and removing bureaucracy across the company. The company did not say which teams or locations will be affected, but the latest cut is to affect nearly 10% of Amazon's corporate workforce. Amazon said U.S.-based employees will have 90 days to seek internal roles, and those who do not transition will receive severance pay, health insurance, and job placement support. Scientists say that the world is closer than ever to destruction. The Bulletin of Atomic Scientists on Tuesday moved the Doomsday Clock to 85 seconds to midnight. Scientists advanced the clock by 4 seconds this year to the closest to midnight it has ever been set. They cited the catastrophic risks of unregulated artificial intelligence and the collapse of international nuclear cooperation. The 2026 assessment highlights that the combination of AI-driven warfare and intensifying global conflicts has pushed the world into its most dangerous state since the Doomsday Clock's creation in 1947.
I'm sure I'm not the only one who's feeling worn out by this prolonged cold spell. Layering up every morning, pulling on those long, bulky, padded jackets and hunching our shoulders against the cold wind, it all adds up. And the bitter cold is sticking around longer than expected, with cold wave alerts being in place across much of central parts of Korea. Then tomorrow morning will be the coldest of this week, with Seoul falling to minus 12 degrees Celsius. But starting Saturday afternoon, we'll finally see a gradual warm-up as daytime highs begin to climb. But at the same time, dry conditions are intensifying day by day. Dry weather alerts have been expanded further, with vegetation extremely dry. Even small sparks can spread quickly, so extra caution is essential. And this afternoon, highs will reach minus 1 degree here in the capital, Daegu, Gyeongju, both topping out at 4 degrees under sunny skies. Please stay warm and stay alert to fire safety.
That's all we have for this morning. Arirang News will be back at noon Korea time. Thanks for watching.